Hey guys, this is Tanner Smith, EDL 851 case study, A Good Teacher Turns Bad. And in this case study, there's been reported unprofessional behavior by a veteran first grade teacher at Crestview Elementary School. I'm going to identify problems based on the information that we're given and also questions that need to be answered. Based on the analysis of that information, I'll make a research-based plan of action which will be created to effectively and professionally implement a solution to the situation. An implementation of a specific plan will resolve the current issues and provide steps to foster a supportive and student-focused environment moving forward. The first part here is the problem identification and analysis. And there's two parts to that. First of all, what is known? We do know Mrs. Wilson, the school principal, is in her fourth year as an administrator. Her faculty has been working well together for many years now, and the school does seem to be performing well. Initially, Mrs. Wilson noticed a change in behavior and attitude from Mrs. Horton around spring break of Mrs. Wilson's third year as principal. And it was known at the time that Miss Horton's husband left her and their two teenage sons. And at that time, Mrs. Wilson kind of hoped that the summer break would alleviate some of Mrs. Horton's difficulties she was having at the end of that year. But coming back from summer break, Crestview started piloting a new reading program which was mostly backed by staff and Mrs. Wilson. However, Mrs. Horton continued with her behavior and attitude in that she didn't agree with the new program, and she also kind of berated teachers at times. And also in the first 6 weeks of Mrs. Wilson's fourth year as principal, she started receiving phone calls and letters regarding Mrs. Horton's demeanor in class towards students. Miss Horton was also had stated she was arriving to school late several days of the week. So we know some of this behavior and attitude continued into that year. So due to these allegations, Mrs. Wilson had made several classroom observations and found there was really no evidence of any negative treatment towards the students. Later on, the superintendent contacted Mrs. Wilson and explained that most of the school board members had been contacted by 4 different parents or families requesting that their children be removed from Mrs. Horton's classroom because of the treatment their kids were receiving. Then there was the incident with Mr. Stafford. He was a concerned parent. He came to the school requesting a conference with Mrs. Wilson to discuss his daughter, Julie, and her participation in Mrs. Horton's classroom. So the parent-teacher conference was set up with Mr. Stafford, Mrs. Horton, and Mrs. Wilson, the principal. Mrs. Horton was made aware of this. Mr. Stafford showed up the next day, and it had seemed that Miss Horton was unprepared. She was rummaging through her desk for grades and Julie's work. So the principal Mrs. Wilson started off by asking what he hoped to get out of it. So Mr. Stafford began explaining why he and his wife wanted their daughter Julie removed from the class. And about that time, Mrs. Horton erupted, shouting, slamming her fist on the table, and accusing Mr. Stafford of being a liar and telling lies. So the principal, Miss Wilson, stopped the conference, postponed the meeting until she could discuss the situation or the issue further with Mrs. Horton. That's what we do know. What we need to know from this situation is what the district's formal evaluation process is and how is that practiced. I'd also like to know about the previous evaluations made on Mrs. Horton and to see if any of that behavior has been shown in the past. And I'd also like to look at some of the student data academically and see if the students' academics are any kind of indicator of Ms. Horton's effectiveness in the classroom as far as instruction is concerned. I'd also like to know, are walkthroughs being conducted? Is a mentorship program established? And exactly what type of visits did Mrs. Wilson make at the end of last year and at the beginning of this year? The literature also states that there are 3 aides utilized in the school. I'd like to know if any of those aides are present in Mrs. Horton's classroom. And then next, I need to know district details such as policies regarding teacher probationary status, um, employee conduct or handbook policies, and dismissal policies. And then lastly, a major factor that little information is given in the presence of professional development, or is the presence of professional development. I'd like to know how professional development is planned in the district, how it's provided, and then really what kind of professional development opportunities the district has. So based on this information, I came to a stated problem, which is, the scenario entails multiple issues with Crestview Elementary, and the most obvious issue is Mrs. Horton's behavior in class and during the parent-teacher conference with Mr. Stafford. However, I think the true issue is not just Mrs. Horton, but the underlying problems with Crestview Elementary is the school's evaluation process and what seems to be the lack of professional development opportunities to improve instructional practice. So next is my plan of action. My first step, or part of my first step really, is meeting with Mrs. Horton and just, talking with her and seeing what we can do for her, if she needs anything specific from us. This could simply be a case where her personal struggles are too overwhelming for her, and maybe she needs some time off, or maybe counseling would help her get back to a stable emotional state. From there, after that initial meeting, I'd like to have or perform a formal evaluation of her in the classroom. And I would most likely follow the clinical supervision practices with the pre-observation conference, the classroom observation, data analysis and strategy, the post-observation conference, and then the post-conference analysis. From there, I'm probably most likely going to develop a plan of improvement. And I will do that with Mrs. Horton. We'll collaborate together to develop that plan. And hopefully that will provide professional development that will meet her specific needs in the classroom, and then provide classroom support with the addition of maybe a teacher's aide and an instructional mentor. I know she is a veteran teacher. However, with the current status of her classroom and the accusations, I think an instructional mentor would benefit her. And then professional development in the classroom and behavioral management would be a good start to help Mrs. Horton, along with research-based instructional strategies that we can implement in there. My hope is that the addition of an instructional mentor will also encourage productive dialogue and reflection by Mrs. Horton, hopefully leading to improved instructional practices. And I, as a principal, will also practice more purposeful walkthroughs to further assist her and provide her with actionable feedback and encouragement. After that, step 3, after the plan of improvement has been developed and initiated, I think it's important for me to communicate with the stakeholders involved. So I'll write a formal correspondence to the parents of the students in Mrs. Horton's class. And in this letter, I'll just explain the steps I've taken as a building leader to ensure that the students are being academically challenged in a safe and supportive environment. And I'll assure them that we are doing what we feel is in the best interest of their children and their children's academic. During this time, I will also be in close contact with the superintendent, and once the plan of improvement, this is step 4, once it's executed, I will conclude my formal evaluation of Ms. Horton. And at that time, I'll analyze multiple data points, and I'll make a recommendation to the superintendent and see what further steps need to be taken, whether if we're capable, or if we find her effective, then we'll retain her as an effective teacher, or if we're capable, we'll put her on a probationary status. Or if it's serious, then we will take steps to dismiss her. The last step I have here is after this situation, I believe a change in our district's evaluation process is necessary. And this is also a time for me to reflect as an evaluator and determine if I need more training to perform my evaluations in a more effective manner. I think I'll form a task group of different staff members to work with administration to review and revise our current evaluation system, and to develop a collaborative and effective evaluation system that should utilize peer evaluations, team walkthroughs, mentorship programs for new and probationary educators, formal evaluations that practice clinical supervision processes, and the use of student portfolios, a system of testing that allows for the triangulation of testing data, and a professional development plan that encompasses whole staff training, and also job-embedded professional development, and professional development opportunities specific to the individual teachers, so that we can improve their instructional practices. Next here we have category 3, which is promote the success of all students. Um, I think we're with the promotion of the success of all students, professional development, it starts right there with that. I believe providing Ms. Horton with an instructional, with the necessary professional development will improve her instructional practice and classroom management. And then with an instructional mentor, I believe that will create open dialogue, which she'll be able to work with them and collaborate, and they'll be able to provide actionable feedback for her that she can take, reflect on, and implement strategies into her classroom that will probably help her. An instructional mentor will also provide more observations in the classroom as well. When it comes to a teacher's aide, I think throwing a teacher's aide in there will help Mrs. Horton assist students, which maybe the class is too large, maybe the kids are just a little rowdy this year, but a teacher's aide I think can help alleviate some of the stressors that Mrs. Horton is feeling. And then for me as the evaluator, I need to have purposeful walkthroughs and need to improve my evaluation practices. And I do believe the plan of action here takes steps to ensure a supportive and safe environment for students. Next is category 4, thinking, feeling, and valuing. Initially, I felt shocked I wasn't aware of the behavior sooner, especially since Mrs. Wilson made observations early in the year and didn't find anything. I also thought Mrs. Horn was a capable teacher, but she was going through some difficult times personally, and I know that was affecting her. But maybe she just needed some different resources and support to get her through the tough time. And I think the situation provides an opportunity for self-reflection as an evaluator. Am I doing my job to the best of my the best of my ability? Is our evaluation process efficient enough? Am I able to do my job and properly evaluate educators? And then I also value the communication with parents. You know, the parents seem to communicate with me very well, and I believe the conference with Mr. Stafford, although it was pretty intense, the parents seem to be able to communicate with the principal in the building pretty efficiently, and I think that communication goes both ways, and I valued that quite a bit. And then I feel further action might be necessary to assist Mrs. Horton, especially if, you know, in that initial meeting we decide that maybe she is fed up with teaching or maybe she needs counseling. If it's more of the emotional mental state of her because of the personal issues, then there's some things, steps we need to take to assist her in that. Category 5, reflection of standard 2. Component 1, I think we accomplished this by providing professional development for Mrs. Horton. We also provided her with an instructional mentor to help her get through the difficulties she was facing in the class. And we also increased observations by me. Component 2, instructional practice focused on research-based strategies. I think implementing those will help her instruction. And the addition of classroom aid, I believe, will help her with those stressors. And then component 3 here, collaboration between Horton and observers is a bonus. And then improved evaluation process towards the end when we reflect on that. And then communication with stakeholders, I think, is huge. And we always have to have, as a principal, I have to have an open line of communication with all stakeholders to make sure that, you know, we all have a responsibility when it comes to the school building. I need to be doing my job as evaluator and make sure that my teachers are educating the students to the best of their ability. And then the parents also have a role they play within the school. There are my resources, and then I'm going to leave you guys with this quote here. What the teacher is more important than what he or she teaches. I think it's important for us to do what we can to help the educators as administrators, do what we can to help educators just be the best that they can. And remember that we're in this job for the students, and they are number one. So I appreciate it. It was a good class. I learned a lot. Thank you guys.